Tony Diaz, the Librotraficante. This is, of course, on the Librotraficante Facebook page. This will also air on the Nuestra Palabra radio show on 90.1 FM KPFT. It'll also be live streamed on fox26houston.com. And of course, it'll be in band classes throughout America if this continues on and on and on. Because here's the main point. We're not going to go away. So if you're tuning in right now, what are you going to experience? You're going to experience the reassembly of a powerful network of individuals that reaches from the upper echelons of the intellectual world. Some people might call it the ivory tower. I don't like that term because these are community folks who work with your families, your students to get things done. And today, we're making an announcement about the TEKS Board of Education's work on upcoming issues for history requirements. So let's get something straight. This is the beginning of a new phase for campaigns. We're coming together in a unique way, more partners. But here's the goal. We have to protect our history. The American dream through education is in danger. Why? Because back in the day, when I went to school, and my parents were busy breaking their backs, making sure that the bills were paid, breaking their backs, but telling me that they wanted me to go to school so I didn't have to break my back. And people like me and a lot of the scholars and politicians you're going to hear right now, they could go to school. They could learn. They could progress. Those days are over. Fantastic. We have our friends also. Fantastic. Y aquí estamos para servir también para la gente de habla español. Aquí estamos unidos para asegurar que nuestra juventud tenga acceso al sueño americano a través de la educación. Now, again, this is the beginning of this new phase of a longer campaign. Today, the TEKS Board of Education will be beginning the topics of addressing the rules and policies that will shape how students throughout Texas experience our history and culture. They might not directly vote on that today, but every day up until June when they vote on a policy is important. We're going to inform you bit by bit of what that means. So today we've got some of the leading intellectuals, organizers, and representatives who want to make sure that our youth have access to the American dream through education and that they can experience their history and culture. Porque nosotros sabemos que eso es lo que cuenta. Si nuestros alumnos tienen acceso a sus historias, se inspiran y tienen éxito en los salones escolares. Entonces, formalmente vamos a comenzar en un rato, pero también quiero introducir a una gente que siempre están apoyando este proyecto. Entonces, como les dije, yo soy Tony Diaz, el Librotraficante. También tenemos el profesor Christopher Carmona, que quiero que les dé un saludos. Christopher, do me a favor and say hi to the folks that are tuning in right now. Again, we are getting ready for the formal press conference, but we're doing a live stream now. We're getting our media set up, and we want to inform the public about what this is about at every phase. This is Dr. Christopher Carmona, who is a chair for the National Association for Chicano Scholars, K through 12 Mexican American Studies Committee. Dr. Carmona.
Yes, well, thank you guys for joining us on the live stream. We are getting set up here, so it's going to be a few minutes before we start the press conference, but we're looking forward to everybody who's speaking today. And just for you, I just want to hang on for just a few minutes before we get more of the press are able to find parking. But yes, so Tony will be emceeing this whole event so that we'll get everybody a chance to speak here. But thank you guys. Did we add in?
And right now, Christopher's going to add some more names that are coming up. But I want people to understand that this is a statewide movement. We've got folks in here from Houston, San Antonio, obviously Austin because we're at the Capitol. But more folks are going to keep on coming. And when I say that this is an introduction to the new phase, I want you to understand what I mean by that. So today, TEKS Board of Education will begin engaging in a discussion that will shape how our students experience or do not experience their history and culture. This is one phase. A lot of the folks you're going to meet today will continue that work. However, I also want you to know at the grassroots level, there's another Librotraficante caravan of banned books coming to Austin, Tejas, Friday, April 29th. And again, not alone. We got buses coming from San Antonio, Houston. Our partners include statewide LULAC, the YWCA in Houston and San Antonio and Austin. Also, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center in San Antonio. Fredericksburg también is coming to our aid. We're going to help them by opening in the Librotraficante underground library. What does that mean? That means that everybody in here is going to make sure that our gente have access to the community and culture at all times, not at the whim of the administration. And before I throw it to Jaime Puente to say hi, and we're waiting for the formal press conference to begin, or also, and then we're going to have some other folks. Let me just add one thing. 10 years ago, Arizona officials banned Mexican-American studies. We opened underground libraries. We didn't think we'd have to call on them again. I'm glad we did. Our community came together. And 10 years ago, we overturned that racist law. The basic approach has changed. The intent is the same, but we're going to win again. One of those activists that's been involved is also an intellectual. Please welcome Jaime Puente, whose whole family's involved in this. So Jaime, if you can say a few words, por favorcito.
Thanks, Tony. I think one of the important things to remember about us being here is that we're here once again for an unnecessary effort to ban our history and recreate and redefine what it means to be Texan. And we can't let a very narrow-minded and very antiquated understanding of what it means to be Texan be reinforced for our kids today. So thank you, Tony, for having us here. And he'll be right back.
Thank you very much. So for those folks that are just tuning in, please share this right now. You're tuning into a live stream at the Texas State Board of Education's meeting here in Houston. I'm sorry, I just came from Houston, Texas, so I'm adjusting. Here in Austin, Texas, the capital of Texas. It is a live stream on Librotraficante's Facebook page as well as Nuestra Palabra. It's also being shared on fox26houston.com. The audio will air on 90.1 FM KPFT, our radio show. And guess what? We're going to download this. We're going to make sure that you can access this for your Mexican American Studies classes, your American cultural classes, our underground libraries. So this is an important moment in the next phase of our movement for Mexican American history. And I'll add this as well, African American history as well, because we want to make sure that every student can access both. Now, I'm deferring to Christopher to kind of guide us on our formal lineup. If you haven't been to Austin lately, there's a lot of construction. So folks are wandering around. We want to get the live stream going. I'm going to throw it right now then, out of order, to Zeph Capo, not just because he's from Houston, but because his union represents a lot of different educators. I'm an educator. I'm pro-union. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that teachers can help families and students to teach the best education possible on the planet. Zeph, if you kind of say a few words, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here with you all today. I so appreciate this opportunity to stand with our organizations who are fighting to make sure everyone is included. It's important that all of our students learn their history and learn the truth about our communities. And I want to say a special thanks to all the groups, all of the community members, parents, and others who are standing by our educators, because you all are what gives them the support to teach the truth to our kids, to make sure that our kids know their history and see themselves and their lives and their communities reflected in their lessons every day. So we're honored and proud to be here with you and know that Texas AFT will stand with our community on these issues always. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Él es Zeph Capo del Sindicato de Profesores y Educadores. Yo soy un profesor también al nivel universitario, pero también yo quiero que la gente sepa que esto nos afecta a cada familia, desde niño hasta adulto. ¿Por qué? Porque nosotros sabemos si nuestra comunidad tiene acceso a sus historias, van a tener éxito en la escuela. Así es de fácil. Lo que queremos lograr ahora es que los representantes que hemos elegido siempre tengan en mente nuestros deseos. Y nuestros deseos son simples. Queremos que nuestras historias se den en las clases, en los salones de Tejas. Si uno no sabe, les quiero contar que más de 52% de todos los alumnos en todas las escuelas públicas en Texas son latinos. Pero también les quiero dar las malas noticias que no están hablando de nuestra cultura en los salones escolares. Yo me llamo Tony Diaz, el Librotraficante. Yo estoy llegando aquí desde Houston, Texas. También aquí tenemos colegas desde San Antonio y obviamente desde Austin. Nos estamos uniendo para asegurar que su familia tenga acceso a la educación más poderosa del mundo. Pero eso está en peligro. ¿Por qué? Porque ahora estamos aquí uniéndonos para asegurar que los gente que hemos elegido a representarnos a nivel estatal tengan en mente nuestra cultura, nuestra juventud. Entonces aquí estamos para recordarlos que nuestras familias quieren que sus alumnos aprendan de sus raíces, de su cultura, y esa campaña comienza hoy día. Entonces, ahora los oficiales van a estar hablando acerca de las ideas que van a implementar. Aquí estamos comenzando el proceso. En junio van a formalmente votar, pero nosotros los vamos a informar hasta ese momento y en cada paso. También les quiero dejar saber que el 29 de abril vamos a volver aquí en una caravana de libros prohibidos. Estos libros son muy sanos, son muy bonitos. Lo que pasa tiene que ver con nuestra cultura y jamás pensamos que eso es una razón para prohibir estos libros. Entonces nosotros vamos a exigir que nuestra comunidad tenga acceso a estos libros. La caravana, el 29 de abril, llegan desde Houston, San Antonio, Fredericksburg. Nos vamos a unir aquí en Austin. Vamos a abrir si pueden creer que tenemos que tener una biblioteca, una librería clandestina. Vamos a abrir una biblioteca clandestina aquí en Palm Park. En Palm Park es un sitio donde una vez en la historia de Texas no permitían a mexicanos que podían usar la biblioteca de los anglosajones, si pueden creer eso. ¿Qué pasaba? Nuestra gente se juntaba en Park Elementary School. Y ahí, en Park Elementary, es donde tenían acceso mexicanos a libros. Cuando vengamos el 29 de abril, ahí vamos a marcar esa historia y seguir haciendo que lleguen libros a nuestra gente y comunidad. I also want to take
We're going to get started.
Fantastic. So, thank you so much for joining us for the press conference. This is a new coalition that is uniting to pick up the work that's begun by many. Some recently, when we've seen the passing of ethnic studies at the statewide level, some for decades, who've been fighting for ethnic studies across the country for almost 50 years. But today, we mark a new era because the Texas State Board of Education are talking about some issues regarding policies that affect history and culture. They will vote on that in the next few months. We want to make sure that they've got all the information they need. We want to make sure the public's involved. And we have assembled then some of the leading organizers, intellectuals, and leaders that can talk about this. So first off, we are going to have Val come up to us, or Christopher Carmona from our National Association for Chicano Studies. He is the chair of the Tejas Foco Committee, K through 12, Mexican American Studies Committee. He's going to come up and address you to kick off our press conference and give you another context about what we're talking about. Please welcome from the Valley, that's the longest drive. You win the award for the longest drive, Dr. Christopher Carmona.
Thank you guys for joining us today. We're here to, once again, it's at the State Board of Education because they're going to start discussing the changing of the social studies TEKS this round today and this morning. So one of the things I wanted to go through, things that we've been doing over the past few months in particular is working to kind of bring all of the ethnic studies coalitions together here for Texas for this particular thing. And so just a couple days ago, we did agree to kind of form this ethnic studies coalition for Texas schools. And that's brought together a lot of different people that are going to be speaking here today. And one of the things that I want to go ahead and find my statement. get started is to talk about what this is all about, one of the pressing issues that we're seeing not just here in Texas, but across the country. And that itself is censorship. And censorship itself, has raised its ugly head. And we've been advocating expanding public school curriculum that includes underrepresented groups like Mexican Americans, African Americans, the indigenous communities, Asian and Pacific Islanders, and of course, gender and women's studies, which we're trying to also get past get these courses going. But this past year, the Texas legislature has engaged in a campaign to reverse a lot of the work that we have been doing with the passage of House Bill 3979 and SB3, which has limited the teaching of certain things, right? And a lot of that is really looking at limiting the teaching of American or U.S. history and the public school system. The problem is that these bills and now the law are calling for censorship with the base argument of reverse discrimination that accuses our schools of knowingly and purposely making quote unquote white youth feel responsible for the racial sins of their father. The SBOE is now being called to embrace this hateful censorship and in the process discard two of its bedrock principles. That verifiable and trustworthy history serves as the foundation for our state's ethical principles in the profession and the ongoing oversight work of the SBOE. The directive from the legislature and the governor's office, in other words, not only proposes to censor the teaching of subjects regarding to race, it also questions the integrity of public servants in the SBOE and the good judgment of well over 300,000 professional teachers and educators in Texas. Members of the SBOE and the general public should consider this legislation, the intent behind it. According to State Representative Steve Toth, who is the author of the initial bill, the teaching of race in the 1619 project, quote unquote, caused harmful classroom activities in a racial discriminatory curriculum, end quote. In his letter to the fellow legislature, Toth offered evidence only of one single book that teachers from the Dallas Highland school system supposedly was recommended by one of their teachers. That book, and according to the representatives from that area, no teacher had ever brought that book up at all, just to make that clear. But this is one of the arguments that they use, that this book, which was circulated during the legislature, taught basically discrimination against white students, and this is what there was the basis for this. This book itself has never been taught in a public school system. And so what we have here in, all the other thing he talks about is the suicide amongst children of between 10 and 14 that has exploded in the past years, the past 11 years particularly. And he cites that the reason for this is the teaching of race. Ignoring the fact that students of color have been having lots of suicide. The rates for them have also tripled since 2016, which is another reason. So using that in itself ignores the larger context of the problem. According to the American Medical Association, they found that while parents may be tempted to shelter their children from issues that they find unfavorable or offensive, they may be restricting the child's ability to grow and learn at the same time. These restrictive worldviews are the seeds of bigotry, with the implications being that anyone who believes differently than you must be foolish or misinformed. This is coming from the American Medical Association, who believes that teaching diverse histories is actually better for students' mental health than shielding or censoring their learning of different subjects. So our goal as educators and parents is not to create obstacles to a healthy understanding so that our children can be more productive members of society. This is not a partisan issue. According to the CBS News poll, 80% of Americans favor the teaching of issues related to race and the country's history of racism. The author of the subsequent report concluded the idea that the teaching about race makes students feel guilty about past generation or makes them less racially tolerant gets little traction with most Americans. Right now, we're facing a massive shortage of teachers in the classroom, and this specter of censorship and book banning has only served to add undue stress on the already overburdened profession. Moreover, censorship spreads fears of others, and the banning of book does nothing more than foster anxiety and dread when learning should be purposeful and enjoyable. It is the fear that the framers of the Constitution wrote about when they to ensure the First Amendment, freedom of speech, as its core democratic principle. So this cherished core value has been under attack for the past 100 years. And according to the AFL-CIO, which underscored the fact that the guarantee of access to a free and quality public education should be a right accorded to every child in this country. Securing the guarantee should be a goal and a value that unites all Americans and is supported by public policy and policymakers at every level. Clearly, our lawmakers are seeking to curtail an honest and diverse teaching of history and contemporary society, and the process hinders our children's ability to fully understand and appreciate the complexity of this world. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. That was Dr. Christopher Carmona, chair of the NACCs Foco Kindergarten to 12th Grade Mexican-American Studies Committee. I would just like to reiterate one point that he made. Some folks that oppose our movement claim that such things as critical race theory are discriminatory. As Dr. Carmona clearly stated, we are not here to discriminate. We are here to make sure that every culture can tell its story, and we don't want ours banned. Ese fue el doctor Carmona, Christopher Carmona. Quiere ser muy claro lo que él dijo. Él dijo que hay buena gente que nos acusa de discriminar con este movimiento. Eso no es cierto. Lo que estamos exigiendo es que cada cultura pueda expresar su voz, que cada alumno aprende de cada cultura y además jamás vamos a dejar que nos prohíben a nuestras voces también. Next up is an ally from the Texas Freedom Network. You notice a lot of Latinos coming up here. I love it because they don't have to say they're Latino. I'm going to point out that they're Latino. Why? We don't have enough Latino PhDs. We've got several in the room. We don't have enough Black, Brown, Asian American, Native American PhDs. We've got several in the room. Secondly, Texas Freedom Network has been a big partner for freedom of speech for decades, including when we're fighting the ban of ethnic studies in Arizona. I love them, and I love to see a Latina running the show. Please welcome Val Benavidez, por favorcito, por favor.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Tony. Hi, everyone. I'm Val Benavidez, president of the Texas Freedom Network, an organization of more than 190,000 community and religious leaders and young Texans who support equality, social justice, and public education. Since its founding in 1995, TFN has monitored the State Board of Education, especially its work adopting curriculum standards and textbooks for public schools. I am proud to say that TFN has been here with many of these and other scholars and advocates across the state and over the past decade in their successful effort to get the board to adopt Mexican-American Studies and then African-American Studies courses for Texas public schools. It took a long time, and there were too many wrong turns by the state board. But ultimately, the board agreed that it was important that students have the opportunity to take courses focused on the experiences and contributions of communities of color in our state and nation. Stories long left out of our children's classrooms. The adoption of those elective courses were an important step forward, but we all said from the beginning that they were not a substitute for ensuring that the experiences of our state's diverse communities were appropriately addressed in the core social studies classes that all students are required to take. Unfortunately, certain politicians have suggested to voters that teaching about these experiences, particularly the history of discrimination in this country and its long-term consequences, is somehow a threat. They have passed legislation restricting what schools can teach about discrimination and inequality. They have demanded that schools ban books that discuss the history of racism and LGBTQ people. They have, in effect, sought to erase the stories of our diverse communities from the shelves of school libraries and public school lesson plans. It's not hard to see the cynical reasoning behind these attacks on teaching the truth. They hope whitewashing the past and stoking the culture wars will help them win elections. So I'm here today to call on the State Board of Education to put politics aside and ensure that the new social studies standards they adopt this year will allow public schools to teach the truth. Every child deserves an honest and accurate education that enables them to learn from the mistakes of our past as they help to create a better future for all of us. I look forward to working with these scholars and advocates over the course of this year through our Teach the Truth campaign in helping to ensure that the new social studies standards adopted by the State Board of Education teaches the truth and meets the needs of every student in the classroom in Texas. Thank you.
And that is Val Benavidez from the Texas Freedom Network saying, teach the truth. También yo quiero decir a la gente de habla español, Val es un ejemplo de lo que pasa con nuestra juventud cuando progresan con educación. Son capaces de ser líderes de cualquier grupo. Es todo lo que queremos, que ellos progresen. And I am going to take a little long to pre-introduce and then post-introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Angela Valenzuela. One, she's homegrown. Two, she's also a leader in the field. Three, when Arizona banned Mexican-American studies 10 years ago, she was part of the evidence to overturn that racist law. And we know that law was unfair and unjust. Her book, Subtractive Learning, talks about different tactics that our youth are taught to disparage their own history when they get it. If you forgot that Arizona banned our history and culture, think about this. The erasure of our history has been erased. Leaders like Dr. Valenzuela will not let that happen by teaching our history, inspiring the next era of leaders, and more importantly, creating the books that some fear, but so many of us are edified by. Please welcome La Mera Mera, Dr. Angela Valenzuela. Por favor.
Thank you, Tony, for your wonderful and generous introduction. I'm part of a community. We've all been working hard, laboring very hard. There's a long history. You can take it back to easily to the late 60s, early 70s. This is a legacy agenda that we have been calling for, which is the inclusion of our histories, cultures, languages, epistemologies, ways of knowing into the school curriculum, into TEKS standards. Now we know that teachers can teach beyond, and we certainly hope that they will do that and be inclusive in ways that we are talking about today. And we trust that many of them, if not most of them, are, because they are imparting their craft as they're in the classroom. But a lot of this ends up being, yes, substantive in terms of include, ABC, right, into the curriculum, but it's also symbolic. It's also symbolic of whether or not Texas cares about being inclusive and telling our stories in complex ways, not in reductive ways. It's symbolic in terms of encouraging a school demographic that is increasingly very racially diverse to be able to see itself like a mirror in the curriculum. A lot of what we're seeing in our schools, and this goes back to subtractive schooling that Tony mentioned. What I found in 3 years of study in a Houston school was that the children were alienated from school. They were alienated. They did not feel that the school cared for them, their cultures, their languages, just who they are, the totality of who they are. And then you overlay over that this whole, high stakes testing agenda that it reduces children so oftentimes to a test score, to a number on a piece of paper. It reduces their schools and their teachers to a number, and it creates these perverse incentives to further treat children like objects, right? To treat them as test score generators and producers. I mean, let alone that that's far flung from what the educational mission should be, which should be the most sacred aspect of what we do, of what we carry out as a community and as a state. It should be sacred. What could be more important than the enterprise of educating our children and our youth? What could be more important, right? And so, I mean, let alone that that is happening, this extreme objectification of youth, but what is also not happening, and that is a huge opportunity cost, and not only for children of color, but for white children as well. The massive opportunity cost is that by denying them their curriculum, their histories, their stories systematically, and in fact, the testing system, I mean, we often see that it structures out that curriculum because of a hyper focus on raising test scores, right? But even without the testing system, we still have these inequities that get reproduced over and over again, such that when children are denied their language, their cultures, their community-based identity, well, you know, we might be able to say that they're in jail, right? We might be able to think about it in those ways to understand what I believe is the beginning of the school to prison complex, which is that when you keep these knowledges, these stories, that you keep them hidden from view, well, you know, there's no sense of belonging, no sense of, you know, feeling that, you know, as a child, you or your community is part of the grand American narrative. You don't feel that you're part of this American story, even if the objective history and history telling has it so. If we think about Senate Bill 3, it is a policy, but it's also like in a context. Let's think about that context, okay? A pandemic, it's the context of the George Floyd killing, the racial justice matter that ensued. And before that, let's go back to 2010, more recently, for inclusion of ethnic studies in the curriculum. A lot of the reason we had the racial justice movement is precisely because so many of us educators for decades have actually been teaching the truth. We've actually been doing that. And so there was this spark that happened that is positive, that was moving in a great direction in terms of inclusion and diversity and outcomes that we should all care about, right? I mean, why do we want to reproduce a society that is closed-minded, that is narrow? We're not serving children. They are not well served by a curriculum that does not teach a complex history of these stories. And that is not the same as saying that we want to teach narrowly to Mexican Americans or African Americans. We're all complex within this research. We look at intersectionalities. You're not just Mexican American or Latina. Maybe you're an immigrant. Maybe you're undocumented, right? Maybe you're experiencing gender oppression, right? Or maybe you're Afro-Latina, or you're African American and you're lesbian, right? Why aren't we teaching LGBTQ studies? Why aren't we teaching disability studies? We act like there's one normative frame, one cultural mode. Well, let me tell you, that's what Senate Bill 3 would have us believe, that there is one normative frame, and that is fascism. That is the Putinization of public education. What is Putin doing right now? I mean, to me, the ironies are just screaming. What he is trying to do, and he's doing clearly with his own people, not with us, but he is crafting the narrative. He is telling you what to think. Well, are we not understanding that that's what Senate Bill 3 is also asking us to do? It's mind control, it's thought control, as if it's even tenable. We're only one click away from knowing the history of our communities today. We're in a different context. So I just want to take the smoke out of all of this. This is a smoke screen. This is a smoke screen for white hegemony, for non-inclusive curriculum. And so that, even if it's a cost to them, which it will be a cost to white children to not know about the complexity of their own context, it's a chance worth taking for people that are fascist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Angela Valenzuela, for going there. I do want to point something out. How was our history erased? Dr. Valenzuela's work and legend should be household news. She is a Latina icon. And on that note, I said we're going to do a long post introduction as well. She's an often Latina icon. On Friday, April 29th, we're doing a Librotraficante caravan with buses coming from San Antonio and Houston, but we're leaving Houston from our mural for 5 Latina icons. In Houston, Tejas, we have a mural for our 5 Latina icons. There's more, but that's one thing. We've got 5 emerging Latinas who will kick off our caravan there and demand that Latinas be in classrooms as teachers, students, as the topics, as the textbooks. They're gonna come here to Austin on that caravan, and we're gonna wind up at the Capitol. And what we're demanding is simple. Truth, what you heard now, history, our cultura, everyone's cultura. Where is Austin's Latina icon mural? We're gonna recognize 5 Austin Latina icons, including Dr. Valenzuela, because we cannot let her history, yes, there's applause right here. Because she is a Latina icon. And if you can't name 5 of them, we're bringing 5 from Houston. We're gonna name them 5 for you today. And that should be in the classrooms. And if it's not, we're starting underground libraries to make sure you get that information as well. Thank you, Dr. Valenzuela. This statewide movement, next up is another part of our larger coalition. It's the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas. 2 more PhDs, because that's what happens when you have access to these books. Please welcome 2 gifted intellectuals and community organizers, Valerie and Eliza. Por favor.
Hello, everyone. As members of the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas, composed of over 800 ethnic studies content experts, educators, students, parents, and community organizers, we propose a series of recommendations to help guide the current social studies TEKS review process. We offer a vision of an education built on a solid foundation of the following 3 values: honesty, healing, and hope. In this vision, education serves the needs of all learners with the purpose of building a thriving, unified future rather than serving the needs of political interest. As a community dedicated to the success of every child in our K-12 education system, we believe our curriculum should be reflective of the diverse populace and share an honest account of our nation's history so that we may be able to heal from painful histories and move toward the hope of a brighter future for our collective community. Specifically, we mobilize the term honesty to include recognition of the original Native American, Indian, and indigenous inhabitants of what has become the United States of America, as well as the lived experiences and contributions of the diverse peoples and communities of color that have helped shape the country into what it is today. The recognition of these historical truths about our nation past will lead to the healing of our divided community and will provide hope to future generations in our ability to work with mutual respect and emotional intelligence across party lines to grow and build collaboratively. Our vision of education is not based on outdated notions of assimilation, but instead draws from the collective strength across our differences so that we can think thoroughly about our interrelated lives to build an interdependent future. Together, as families and caregivers, educators, administrators, the community at large, we can shape a curriculum that produces compassionate, global citizens and servant leaders of tomorrow. Hope lives in the knowledge that our youth will be prepared with strong problem-solving skills and social-emotional capacities to meet current and future challenges, having learned and healed from the lessons of the past. Therefore, we ask the Texas State Board of Education to move to accept the following recommendations.
As the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas, we're very proud of the community-based and generations-long struggle that succeeded in the State Board of Education being the first in the nation to approve standards for Mexican American studies and then African American studies They're going to revise these TEKS in the social studies process. So the recommendations that I'm reading are specific to those ethnic studies courses and the how they go about doing that work. We ask that the proposed ethnic studies working groups be composed of content experts from the disciplines of Mexican American and African American studies, including K through 16 educators who have taught ethnic studies courses and content advisors who help to craft the innovative and elective courses for each field of study. We ask that a working group be developed for each ethnic studies course with relevant content experts and with input from content experts regarding their composition. We ask that working group recommendations be released at least 2 weeks prior to being discussed and reviewed by the State Board of Education members so that the communities who help to write these courses have time to properly review them. We ask that the State Board of Education maintain fidelity to the meticulously researched content, curriculum models, core themes, and historical periodizations of Mexican American and African American studies. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Mis colegas tenían unos pasos muy específicos para darles a los oficiales para que implementen policías que apoyen a nuestra comunidad. That is all that we're asking for. I am a proud educator. I teach Mexican American Studies. I am a proud member of the American Federation of Teachers, and I'm very proud to bring to the stand our statewide president, Zeph Capo. Please come on up, Zeph.
Thank you, Tony. My name is Zeph Capo, and I'm the president of the Texas AFT. When schooling went remote in 2000 due to the pandemic, parents were given instant and complete insight into what it meant to be a teacher, and teachers were rightly hailed as some of the heroes of the moment. When students returned some months later, but campuses remained largely closed to parents, bad actors in the legislature exploited this lack of visibility to sow doubt in communities and elevate false and divisive narratives about schools and teachers. Abbott in particular has been looking to scare parents by focusing his attention on cheap political tricks that mischaracterize classroom learning and the content in books. But we will not let him distract us. The real focus should always be to make sure every single child has an opportunity to succeed inside and outside of the classroom. We should trust that teachers will teach the standards adopted by the SBOE by making local decisions about the content of the instructional materials and the contents of libraries. Teaching empathy is not classroom activism. In fact, through other legislation passed last session, the legislature has told us that concern for the common good and humanity, respect for justice and the rights of others, as well as the recognition of multiple perspectives, differences, diversity, biases, and the social and cultural context in which they live, are in fact essential learning for all students in the state. This isn't just about the future of our children's learning. It's also about whether we will continue to support and strengthen a democracy that we have known for hundreds of years. Academic freedom is a cornerstone of our very democracy. And when it is threatened, just like when the free press is threatened, our democracy is threatened. All young people deserve an equitable education, and to prepare students for the future, they must learn the history and cultures of indigenous communities, people of color, LGBTQIA, and other communities as we become a more global society. I want to thank TLEAC and the other organizations here for the opportunity to stand with you and speak out today. I want to thank you for standing with our educators as they vow to teach the truth to our kids and our communities. Because we know this isn't about some kids having their feelings hurt or even about parent involvement in education. This is about power and what some in our legislature are willing to do to hang on to it. Our educators are literally teaching truth to power every day because our students are the key to who will hold power in this state. Those in power right now don't want them hearing the truth because it's not a good look to young people who don't harbor the hate and fear that so many of them use to stay in power now. Now Dan Patrick wants to double down on hateful rhetoric by introducing his version of the Don't Say Gay bill in Texas. More distraction and hate mongering. Everyday Texans would all be better off with a Don't Say Dan bill. Who wants to carry that one? Once again, thank you for standing with our kids, our communities, and our educators, and know that Texas AFT will always have your backs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I want to repeat the new initiative, Don't Say Damn bill, which is very humorous, but let's get something straight. I also want to remind folks, Dan Patrick also said he's going to go after professors at the university level who teach critical race theory. Who are those professors? They are teachers that teach African-American history and Mexican-American history. That's the actual target. So we're organizing right now to make sure that our history and culture is not attacked or erased continuously. I do want to remind folks that this is a brand new phase of our movement. We're bringing in together many strands for this next effort. This is the convening of the Ethnic Studies for Texas Schools Coalition. Very happy to bring another one of our partners, colegas, familia, to speak with you. Please give a warm welcome to Maggie Stern from the Children's Defense Fund.
Thank you, Tony. My name is Maggie Stern. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Youth Civic Education and Engagement Coordinator with the Children's Defense Fund of Texas, or CDF. We're really proud to join our partners here today, calling on the State Board of Education to support all young Texans as they revise the social studies essential knowledge and skills. Throughout this process, the State Board of Education must teach a truthful and diverse history, stand up against censorship, and equip students with the civic skills they will need to be lifelong engaged members of their communities. The Children's Defense Fund was founded in 1973, rooted in the civil rights movement and the mission to ensure that every child has a healthy start, a head start, a fair start, a safe start, and a moral start in life and successful passage to adulthood with the help of caring families and communities. From our Freedom Schools program to our Youth Texas Advocacy Initiative, we know that mission requires supporting young people to learn from the past, understand the present, and prepare for the future with hope, education, and action. The State Board of Education serves all students across Texas, representing a wide variety of backgrounds. Tens of thousands of young Texans belong to the LGBTQ+ community. Nearly 70% of Texas children are Black, Latinx, Asian, or Indigenous. Moreover, young Texans today are living through historical upheavals, with more access than ever to information about current issues and global affairs that affect their lives. 19% have experienced child poverty, 13% are uninsured. Over 14,000 Texas children have lost a primary caregiver to COVID-19, and millions have experienced the trauma of the pandemic disrupting and threatening their lives. We cannot expect young people to walk into their classrooms divorced from these realities, and we cannot respond to their demands for honesty and healing by censoring, whitewashing, or politicizing their classrooms. Young Texans deserve an education that recognizes, celebrates, and helps them navigate the rich complexities of their lives. Instead of censorship, we must demonstrate the values of free speech and civic engagement by encouraging young people to get involved by registering to vote, contacting their elected officials, and serving their local communities. Instead of whitewashing, we must uplift the stories and experiences of the diverse communities of Texas. These narratives must include not only an honest account of historical and modern discrimination, but also the many powerful stories of resistance and advocacy from Texans working together across race, class, and background to make changes that improve all of our lives. Students deserve to be able to see a world of possibility for their futures, and that starts by showing them real examples of leaders, innovators, and thinkers who they can relate to and who empower them to tell their own stories. There is room in our classrooms for a multiplicity of stories and perspectives that allow students to grow and understand the world around them better. And instead of politicization, we must strengthen relationships between students, families, and teachers without the divisive interference of politicians who are more focused on preserving power than on caring for or listening to young people. Because the truth is that this vision of a diverse and honest education is a vision that Texas students and families have been fighting for in their local school districts. I want to highlight 3 recent examples of students joining the work that folks that you've heard from today have pushed forward for decades. First, Texas students delivered a petition 2 years ago with nearly 16,000 signatures, urging the State Board of Education to adopt an anti-racist social studies curriculum. They asked for an education that not only discusses racism and resistance throughout U.S. history, but also supports students to connect these lessons to their experiences of individual and institutionalized racism today. Second, Texas students and families have stood up against racism, homophobia, and discrimination in their local schools and pushed for their districts to adopt ethnic studies courses and equity plans that address disparities in student experiences and outcomes. And finally, Texas students are now organizing in their communities to stand up against a hateful wave of book bans that threatens to silence their voices, suppress their authentic selves, and limit their academic and professional futures. So let's listen to Texas students. Let's make sure that every single Texan has the opportunity for the full and truthful education they deserve. We join our partners to ask the State Board of Education to stand against censorship and stand for Texas students throughout this revision process to pass a truthful and diverse curriculum that nurtures the next generation of Texas leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie, for reminding us to put students first and families first. Next up, we want to acknowledge Mexican-American history. Sarah Zenaida Gould is the Executive Director of the Mexican-American Civil Rights Institute. Sarah, please.
Good morning. It's so wonderful to be here with you today to talk about education. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould. I'm the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, an educational nonprofit that is dedicated to chronicling and advancing Mexican American civil rights history in the United States. We envision communities where all Americans are inspired by the Mexican American civil rights legacy and see themselves as participants and transformational leaders in the ongoing work of advancing democracy. As the State Board of Education undertakes a review of the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, we ask that the committee members keep in mind the most recent data from the census, telling us what we've known for a long time, that our student body is increasingly brown in this state and in this nation. On top of that, the extensive research that demonstrates the positive educational outcomes associated with inclusive teaching of history, which includes the teaching of ethnic studies. This is so important to students to be able to see themselves in the curriculum that they're learning. And of course, let us not forget the rich history and contributions of Mexican Americans, as well as, of course, African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and so many others to advancing democracy in this state and in this country. As a society, we have a duty to provide young people with an accurate and honest telling of the past that allows students to thrive in the present while also grounding them with a strong understanding of not only their country's history, but also how they and their ancestors fit into that history. Parents should know that their children are getting an education that reflects truthful history and not myths or nostalgia for a past that may have never even existed. We're not a perfect country, we're not a perfect society, but surely we all hope to instill in young minds that creating a more perfect union, a union that embraces the history of all of its members, is not only a possibility, but also a truly worthy goal that we can unite behind as a state and as a nation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sara, por el trabajo que tú y tu instituto hacen para hacer llegar por diferentes vínculos nuestra historia, la historia de los mexicanos-americanos. One of our last speakers, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we'll be around here to take questions if you need any further information. I'd like to bring to the stand from the Grand Narrative, Shaena Reyes, please.
Know the history and be the change. Know the history and be the change. That's the rallying cry of over 900 students and Texans in the Grande Narrative community. The Grande Narrative is a student-led organization advocating for BIPOC narratives, that is Black, Indigenous, and people of color narratives in Texas's K-12 schools. Students all over Texas want to learn BIPOC histories and narratives. We recognize that our K-12 education is lacking and demand the full and accurate history of our country be taught rather than the whitewashed one we have received up until now. Because students will ultimately bear the impact of the decisions made by the SBOE, their perspectives are important and must be included in this conversation. So, to give voice to those Texas students, I'd like to share some quotes made by students from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. Texas hosts a diverse community of students, and our educational curriculum should reflect this body of students. Teaching students all sides of the historical narrative allows them to be open-minded scholars and leaders of the world, not just our community. It would be a dishonor to Black and Brown students to not properly teach them about their own history. There was so much we didn't learn about Black culture as well as other cultures and their true struggles in history. We only learned part of it. I definitely think that my education was sorely lacking in anything related to modern social justice. I would have definitely benefited from that knowledge as it benefits our relationship with people of color in our community and all over the world. People need to be more equipped to enter into conversations about race, and it starts in our classrooms. BIPOC history is American history. It is the history of our state. The Grande Narrative supports this coalition as they are the experts in these topics. We join the fight because to be silent on the censorship happening in our schools is to deny education's power to combat racism, to heal communities, and to create the leaders of tomorrow. All students must have accurate, honest, and quality education in order to learn from the past and build a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaena from the Grand Narrative for bringing student voices, because that's what this is about. Thank you for joining us. This has been a convening of the Ethnic Studies for Texas Schools Coalition. My name is Tony Diaz, writer, activist at Librotraficante. The Texas State Board of Education will be convening, and as we mentioned, this is going to be ongoing. We'll come back in June when they'll have some specific votes on this. In closing, what I'm going to say is, I guess we got to be intentional about this. I'm a Chicano. I'm proud to be Chicano. I stand with my BIPOC brothers and sisters. I support LGBTQ rights. I didn't know y'all were confused. So let's make it very clear. You ain't going to erase our culture. You ain't going to erase their culture. At the end of the day, we demand that everyone tell their story. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll all be here. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. Please share it. And you can also see it on Nuestra.